Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm going to talk why fantasy books that are good, that we like, are much more than fantasy. They bring more themes to the table than just fairy tales. If you maybe talk about fantasy with relatives or maybe at the job and people are not so into fantasy, they might just think about ordinary fairy tales with a hero and a villain and a goblin and an orc and a hero and maybe some magic artifact, maybe a sword. And that's it. That's the fairy tale, and that's the tale that sometimes is portrayed as very, very childish. As we know, fantasy is now a broad genre. It's not childish. It can give us a lot of things. I would like to go through some of the books I really love and like, and just explore some of the themes. And I'm going to show you the books I'm going to talk about, and here are two of them. That is Eye of the World and Ryan Coyle of Blood and Fire. And I have the Witcher saga. I have the Game of Thrones, and I have the Malazan, Book of the Fallen, Gardens of the Moon. So let's start with Erickson. And what does he bring to the table? And also Ian C.S. Lamont with the other Malazan books that is not, you know, just only fantasy. There are many themes here. We have archaeology, we have strong mythology, strong spirituality, we have colonialism or the perspective. I have also actually the economic perspective in especially Midnight Tides with mercantilism, I would say. It's surrounded around and on money and on income and so on, profit. We have the perspective of military strategy. This is a lot of a military fantasy, as many of you might know. We have the idea of tribe versus civilization, which is very, very strong in all the Malazan books, I would say. And we have the values, the themes of empathy and compassion. It goes like a thread through this book. That is things that I think raises Malazan above just a tale, a fairy tale, or just a fantasy, so to speak. We have the books of Robert Jordan, Eye of the World, which I'm reading right now, enjoying that a lot. Of Blood and Fire, I've just read this first book, reviewed on the channel. And while I'm holding up these books, I think I can combine this discussion about those two books, these two books, with Lord of the Rings. And I will actually start with Lord of the Rings. It has also a strong mythological foundation, Germanic, Nordic, Finnish, Celtic, and so on. It has a linguistic foundation, which is very interesting. And it also has this political dimensions, I would say. Lord of the Rings with the First and Second World War. I know that Tolkien protested against that, but still, it's written during that time. He had his own experience of being a soldier in the First World War. And we have also a lot of themes here with brotherhood, fate, hope, what you have to do when the world is changing for the worse. What role do you need to take? What is your destiny? All these things turn this very simple story from pastoral England with Frodo, Bilbo, and so on, going on an adventure to something more than just a fairy tale that is only for kids, so to speak. Still, I think even fantasy for kids has a lot of value. We can take Narnia, for example. If we look, which has also the roots in the war. I think it's the Second World War. It might be the first, but the kids has to move out of the countryside with a relative, and there they find the wardrobe. They enter the wardrobe, come into Narnia, having this coming of age story and story with, about Lucy and Edmund and Peter, for example. Go back to Eye of the World and Ryan Coyle's Of Blood and Fire. It's in a similar vein like Tolkien, Lord of the Rings. I would say that Ryan Coyle, of course, draws a lot from dragon myth. That is obviously true with Eye of the World. They are a bit similar to Tolkien. There is some group in Eye of the World called Aes Sedai, which I heard is more connected to Dune, and I think they call it Bene Gesserit or something like that. This woman cult. So I haven't really delved into Eye Over the World yet, but I understand its deep mythological roots that are a bit different from Tolkien, even if the first book is quite similar to some of the Tolkienesque writing, because it had to be that back then to be published. Of Blood and Fire is a kind of blend, I think, between Lord of the Rings and the Eye of the World, and then I think of Blood and Fire also have a lot of inspiration from video games like Elder Scrolls and also Dragon Age. And that would go Dragon Age with the Eye of the World too. So I will come back to these two books, but the themes are obviously similar with sisterhood, brotherhood, what happens when your destiny is something you didn't want or didn't expect it to be. You have forced out into an adventure, and it's against, of course, dark forces. But the more modern the book is, if you compare it with Lord of the Rings, the more grey this good and evil becomes. It's more shady. It's not so easy to know what's evil and not, and it's not so heroic only. And the relationships in the fellowships in the books and the relationships between the good guys and the bad guys are more complicated in these two books than compared to Lord of the Rings. We also have other books here, and that is The Witcher, and we have The Game of Thrones. I want to talk about some of the roles. We talk about tropes, often in fantasy, the villain, the hero, the fool, or the orphan, for example. I think Erickson especially brings in new stereotypes, new tropes into the genre, and one of those are people we don't think so much about, and that is the archaeologist, for example, which of course is obvious that Erickson and Ian C. Esselmont can bring to the table because of the background. We also have the historian in Dead House Gates with Diker, for example, that makes it feels a bit different. As you might know, I have this buddy read with Rick on the channel, Shogun, and actually there are a lot of, it's not fantasy elements in Shogun, but there are a lot of characters that are fantasy-like, and there are relationships to the divine, of course. In Shogun, we have the different people that are pilots. They are historians in a way, I would say, and we have cartographers, for example, different people. That I think is interesting if fantasy would be more able to use in the books, fantasy writers to be able to use that in the books. That would be something very interesting to see. I also have The Witcher here, The Witcher Saga. I'm reading The Witcher at the moment. The Witcher draws inspirations from folk tales, folklore, of course, especially from Eastern Europe, but I think also from Celtic culture. It's a lot about stigma. It's a lot about who's the monster, who's the outcast, are there monsters? We have the idea that not everyone who's chosen to become something wants to be that. That is especially true with Siri. Without spoiling too much, we can say she's not so comfortable with the role she's supposed to be expected to have, and that is something that is common in many genres of literature, not only fantasy. I think that makes this a great book, together with the uncomfortable feelings that Geralt has towards his own identity, and that people also have prejudices against Geralt himself. Yeah, we have Game of Thrones, very famous, of course, and here the inspiration is War of Roses in the United Kingdom. We have the fact of brutal war, brutal conflicts, brutal politics, royalties stuck in power struggles, royalties, and monarchs, queens, princes, and so on. We have the ordinary people in Game of Thrones who is caught into the conditions of war. So there is not so much spirituality, it's more of violence, and more of this very grimdark side of fantasy that you can see here. But there's a lot of focus on survival, or rather not to survive, in Game of Thrones as well. And I think all those themes bring something more to the table than just fantasy and fairy tales. I think especially Game of Thrones has increased or broadened the readership, or the number of readers and type of readers who read fantasy as well. So I think this one is interesting, even though I don't talk about Game of Thrones so much on the channel. So that is some thoughts from me on more than fantasy. The idea is, of course, that you need to bring something more than just the ordinary fairy tale story to succeed as a writer or to enjoy fantasy. I think that the books we like always have something more, and it makes them hard to distinguish them with other genres. It could be sci-fi, but it can also be books like Shogun that I showed. It's not so clear cut. A good fantasy story can give as much as good of a personal development like any other book out there, or even self-help books, for example. So that was some thoughts from me this evening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe, and maybe share, and see you next time. Bye.